Okay, so we're going to be live fairly soon.
Okay, I better just remind myself of the agenda.
Should be live, I think.
Yes, I can see it's live. Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this evening's meeting of the Local Development Plan Advisory Committee. Tonight's topic is green infrastructure, so parks, open spaces, all of those sort of things. We have a number of speakers tonight. We've got several officers in planning, and we've got an external speaker after that. First of all, we better get the sort of formalities out of the way. Are there any apologies for not attending the meeting?
I haven't been sent any.
Okay. Okay, so no apologies. The minutes of the last meeting, unfortunately, the minutes of the last meeting sort of aren't yet available because it's. I mean, I think there've been resourcing issues in democratic services. They haven't, had time to include them in this document pack. But they are. I think there is a draft ready now. If members want, then I can circulate those separately as soon as they're available, so people can feed back comments. So we can do that. Alternatively, you can just wait until the next meeting and review them then, along with the minutes of this meeting. So I'll take the advice of the meeting. What do members want to do?
Chair, that would normally be what we would do, is what you just said then.
We would normally just leave it till the next meeting.
Yes. Yeah.
So I have suggested that if members aren't happy with that, we can circulate them separately. Yeah. But is there any?
It's usually down to the chair to decide whether they're acceptable or not after it goes via the lead officer to say whether it's accurate or not.
Okay, well, I will do that. Are members of the committee happy for me to do that, and they'll wait until the next meeting before they see the minutes?
Agreed.
Yes, that's okay for me, Chair.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so that's Thanks. How we handle the minutes. Oh, are there any? I've forgotten declarations of interest, just in case there are any. Does anyone have any declarations of interest?
Yes, Chair. My hand was up briefly before.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
I think just for clarity, because the report does mention the sports strategy and sports places and so on. Just as many members will know, that my employment is with Ealing Cricket Club, and we do provide sort of sports and lease two grounds from the council.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Councillor Shaw. Anyone else have any declarations of interest? Sort of shout out if you do.
I've got an allotment, Chair, so.
Okay. Okay, yeah, okay. Thanks very much, Councillor Martin. Okay, so that's declarations of interest. Okay, there's no matters to be considered in private as far as I'm aware, so we'll move on. Okay, before we hear from the speakers, there were a couple of members of the public indicated that they would like to speak to the meeting. So one of them I can see is here is Will French. So Will did want to speak at the last meeting, but unfortunately we ran out of time. People may remember we were making good time at one point, and then one of the presentations ran into quite a few technical difficulties, and we just ran out of time at the end. So Will is here to do his presentation tonight, and now Arthur Breens also said that he wanted to speak. I can't see Arthur on the attendance list, so I don't know. Do we know what was he actually sent the
Yes,
the link to
yes,
this
he
meeting?
was.
He was. So
Yeah.
okay, so we've not denied him the opportunity to participate. No. Okay, well, if he suddenly turns up, okay, we'll let him speak. But otherwise, over to you then Will. So feel free to sort of share your sort of screen with us. I believe you've got some sort of slides or something.
Yes,
you'd like
thank you. May I share the screen now?
Yes.
And let me just, it's not very long, but I just felt it would be helpful to have this just to guide me and actually illustrate to you. What I wanted to talk about actually was an issue that has appeared at this month's meeting, but also previous month's meetings, which are some of the comments in the officer reports, which seem to have gone overlooked, but I think are absolutely crucial to what's going on. And I would like to raise them. And this is the paragraphs after the main body of the report, which carries some important information. And on this month's report, you'll see on page 11, section 6, something that talks about value for money. And it talks about the local plan timetable being ambitious to achieve the earliest possible adoption of the new plan. And it says that any delay is likely to result from significant changes to evidence-based documents or the unbundling of documents following public consultation. And this may result in the need for additional rounds of public consultation, which would result in additional costs and expense. And I think this is really important because that seems to sort of crush up quite a lot of really quite important issues about the local plan preparation process. And I do want to just go back to those, if I may. And I think I want to start again by reviewing what this local plan is for. And what it's for, it's a really important document because it sets out, or it ought to set out, the policies that apply in considering development applications. So obviously, as we know, these are can be quite contentious. And what the government guidance says is plans should be shaped by early, proportioned, and effective engagement between plan makers and communities, organizations, businesses, but early, proportioned, and effective engagement between plan makers and communities. That's what the NPPF says. They said plans should be up to date. Of course, in Ealing, the plan is very out of date now, so that's why it's particularly important. Sorry, sorry, did someone say something? Okay. There is government guidance. I'm sorry?
Sorry, could you let Will speak if whoever's making the noise in the background, I don't know what it is, but... there is government guidance on how that plan making process goes, and we really should be following that in Ealing. And I don't think so far what we've seen really, they are being followed in Ealing as the government guidance requires. There's legislation, it's not just guidance, it is legislation. And that provides that there must be a local development scheme, statements of community involvement, authority monitoring reports, and an evidence base. And those key documents are really important and I think should be approved by the local authority, and they should be public for us to be able to see. Here we have what it's saying about local development scheme. They must be available publicly and up to date. It's important local communities, interested parties can track the progress of the plan. Now,
in Ealing, the last local development scheme was published in July 2015. It's not up to date, and particularly when we have a new plan making process underway. I think we really have to get that right. We have to get a new local development scheme published. And here we have statements of community involvement. And again, government guidance sets out that planning authorities must set out this statement of community involvement and how they will engage communities on the preliminary stages of plan making. And these should be updated every 5 years. Now, what I want to show here is this is from the council website, the last statement of community involvement was published in 2015. We don't have a current up-to-date policy from the council about how we, the community, are going to be involved in this really important process, which, you know, we all know is a difficult one. And you know, I don't want to sort of rape, but we need to have a statement of how we're going about it. And similarly, I mean, there's been a lot of conversation about annual monitoring reports, and I know that. But I think what's important about authority monitoring reports is that they're key to understanding the trajectory of change around which the new plan is based. The new plan is a review of the old one. And what an authority monitoring report is designed to do is to track change between those different plans. And we haven't had one for a number of years now, as we know. They are required at least annually, and they should be made available on websites so that people can see them and see which way the council believes things are changing, both internally and externally. And that's not been happening. And as we know, the local government required that missing years be published for our authority monitoring report by December the 15th. So I think we're all still looking out for that. And finally, I want to just raise discussion about the evidence base, because if you go back to page 11 on tonight's report, you'll see section 6, value for money, goes on to say that any delay will mean that key elements of the evidence base already assembled may become out of date, and any necessary refreshing or redoing would add to costs. So my question, and I would ask it very respectfully, is what is the evidence base that we are preparing? Because I don't know where to find it. I would love to be able to consult an evidence base to see where it is being pulled together. I'm also interested to know what value these LDPAC meetings are adding to it. I feel a lot of these meetings are sort of go around quite a lot of general interesting areas, but it's very difficult to discern from any of the presentations what policy implications are arising from them. They comprise a lot of individual people making statements, but there's nowhere where that's being drawn together to show how that's starting to form into an emerging plan. And I think it would be helpful for us, the public, who watch this from outside, to be able to see it. Now, I want to say Ealing Matters has tried to prepare an evidence base. We have tried to track the various reports that have been submitted in the last 2 years to the LDPAC meetings. And we put those all up on our Ealing Matters website. And I would request, as I say, very respectfully, that similar exercise is done by the council so that people can go on the council website and look to see all the different reports, the evidence that is being produced, so they can find out what's going on. So let's just go back to where I started. And I'm just coming to an end now. That any delay is most likely to result from significant changes to evidence-based documents or the unbundling of documents following public consultation. Until we really have a clearer picture of what's going on, I think there is going to be a huge danger that there will be issues arising from the public at some point, which it must do, starting to want to get involved. My respectful conclusion is that at the moment, the local plan process lacks a structure local stakeholders can understand, and that would be found in a local development scheme. So please, let's have that. And I as a priority, I think just publish in draft on the website those key documents that I've been referring to. And I would urge the Cabinet, once they've published those and stakeholders have had a chance to comment, maybe LDPAC has commented and discussed them too, the Cabinet approve them. And I think the eventual outcome will be a better plan that will be prepared with everyone in the light, and not one prepared sort of out of sight, which is where I fear we may be heading at the moment. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to raise that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Will. Okay, well, there's a number of different points there then. So there's the statement of community involvement, the local development scheme, and the AMRs, and kind of, you know, where are they? What is the current status of the AMRs, I guess, and you know, what are we doing with the statement of community involvement and the local development scheme? Questions around the evidence base and sort of what does it consist of, and where is it going to be published? I mean, my understanding is that all of this stuff does have to be published, even though it may not have been so far. And finally, I mean, I think you had a question around that sort of value for money section in the report, and what exactly are the implications of it, and what does it mean? So is there anyone who wants to, one of the planning officers perhaps, or Councillor Manro, who wants to try and respond to that? I can see Councillor Manro is indicating, so I'll let him speak first. Councillor Manro, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. I don't intend to actually refer to all the points raised. I think we'll do that in a different format. I don't think this is the actual format for that, in a sense. But all I would say really is to Mr. French, I'm not sure which planet you're on. We've gone through a massive pandemic in the last 2 years, and there is an issue that we may be going into lockdown again very soon. I think you should at least refer to the kind of issues that the local authorities had to face over the last 2 years in terms of resource allocation and what's been going on. I do understand there are some failings on behalf of the council, and we've dealt with those, and we are dealing with the rest of them. And I think really this is not the forum. This is a forum for us to listen to members of the public around some of the issues that maybe will be tackled in the local plan. So I think we should move on. I will come back to you in a different forum on some of the issues you raised. And I think we should just move on and get on with the purpose of this meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Councillor Manro. I mean, would you be prepared to agree that you know, in order to move things forward, that you sort of get together with the planning officers and with whoever else needs to be involved, and we do a written response?
Yes, I can do that, but I don't think this is the right forum for us to get into this debate.
Okay, well, if that's acceptable to everyone, shall we proceed on that basis rather than having a longer discussion here? Okay, I can't see anyone dissenting.
May I please?
Do any councillors have?
Might I please just come back very quickly?
Yes, of course.
I respect and understand what Councillor Manro is saying. The point is, this is a report, and this is a key item, not just in tonight's report, it's been in previous ones. And it does raise very clearly the problem, the concerns about local people getting involved in the plan making process. Now, it's not been easy for me to get involved in discussion. I tried to make this comment last month, but I was not had time because we were having fairly general conversations about carbon pricing, about Heathrow expansion, about all sorts of things which weren't really relevant for what will go into the plan, which will set the policies that will determine planning applications in the years ahead. And I do think it's something really to try to get to grips with now, rather than just to let it fester, because it will fester, and it's going to fester and just become a debating point later on. I can see I'm being, but anyway, that's the point I wanted to make. Thank you. Okay, thanks, Will. Well, you know, before we move on, I mean, do any councillors want to say anything here, or have any questions for Mr. French? Right. Is anyone?
Yes, sorry, Chair. I've got my hand up.
Councillor Sumner would like to speak as well.
Councillor Sumner. Okay, Councillor Sumner and Councillor Shaw. Councillor Shaw first, and then Councillor Sumner.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, just very, very briefly, as a response to Mr. French, that, you know, we are trying to move the local plan and get it. You know, it is quite urgent that it is up to date, because we do recognise that it is out of date. And within that, you know, my understanding of this committee, you know, you ask the question effectively, what's the point of this committee? You know, why, what are we all doing here? Are we just wasting our time for the next couple of hours? Which is fair enough. You know, we've all got better things that we could be doing, I think. But you know, it is very important that these meetings happen, but these are not the only meetings that are informing the future local plan. My understanding is that there is going to be rounds of engagement with other stakeholders and the community at large right across the borough. I think that was made sort of relatively clear in a previous iteration of this committee, when it sort of started a year or so ago, before it sort of fell redundant for a few months. And so this is only one sort of part of it that's gathering the evidence, that is asking people to come forward and provide evidence to feed into the local plan. And there will be plenty of other forums for people to do that as part of the sort of information gathering process. I mean, I don't know if I did see Mr. Barton is at the meeting, so I don't know if he might be able to sort of make that clear, or if that's his understanding as well.
He's there.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Shaw. Councillor Sumner.
Chair, yes, please expect my indulgence here. I'm a local councillor for Hanger Hill Ward. We have some really big infrastructure stuff happening at the moment, which doesn't seem to be discussed. I mean, there's Twyford Abbey, which is going to they hope it's going to be turned over into a big development. I don't see there's anything green about the development that they're hoping to do there. We haven't had the official plans, but it's almost as if it's accepted that in that area you can go and develop whatever you want. I mean, you know, I put it there, out there, so people know that the Hanger Hill councillors, you know, are going to be concerned, and I'm sure Mr. Barton will be concerned about our concern, because it's a lot of land that's going to disappear into buildings. Okay, thank you very much indeed, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Sumner. Okay, well, do any other councillors or planning officers have anything that they want to say at this point then, before we do move on?
I think Steve Barton's got his hand up.
And oh yes, okay, Steve, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to be helpful, I mean, I must fundamentally disagree with some of the comments that Will French has made, particularly in terms of the relevance of some of the subject matter of previous committees. I mean, he cited two examples, the whole discussion we had at the last committee about carbon pricing, which I would argue is absolutely fundamental if the council is going to meet its targets about net zero and to meet our commitments around climate action. It's actually a very, very important strand of the emerging local plan. And to say that Heathrow is not important when 5,000–6,000 jobs directly depend on the activities of the airport, particularly in the western half of the borough. And when an awful lot of goods and services, particularly in Park Royal, but also in some of our other industrial estates, provide important services for the airport, catering, aircraft parts, etc. It's a fundamental driver in the local economy, and what happens in Heathrow has a big impact on our local economy. And we've seen that during the crisis around COVID, with many people in the borough being furloughed. I think we're one of the top boroughs in London for the number of people who have been furloughed, and part of that is as a consequence of the downturn in the aviation sector. So, these are really, really important issues. We've also, at previous meetings, just to highlight a few, we discussed the very important issue around design, with a number of very solid proposals that have already been implemented in relation to things like design review panels and community review panels. We also had a very interesting discussion about the emerging character appraisals and management plans, which have been subject to extensive informal consultations, particularly with the conservation area panelists, etc., and will be the subject of further consultation, as we previewed early in the new year. So, these issues are really important. And this committee is primarily to gauge the opinion of elected members, for them to input into the process and to help shape the emerging plan. That's the primary purpose of this committee. And obviously I welcome contributions from members of the public and the wider community, and indeed the business community, but there are other forums, as Councillor Manro has indicated, for that to happen. And I almost feel as if we're in a parallel universe, because for the last 6 weeks, we've been doing a very high level consultation around shaping Ealing. That so far has generated, I looked at the figures yesterday, 6,300 responses to the survey, which I have to say, as somebody who's been involved in local plan making for a long time in Ealing, is unprecedented in terms of the amount of response that we've had from different sections of the community, harvesting something like 3,000 email addresses of people who would like to be involved in some of the future events and activities. And we'll be launching early in the new year a newsletter, and you will see a whole slew of further activities and events. And indeed, last weekend I was at a Southall drop-in centre at Manor House, and we had a flurry of people coming in asking us questions about the local plan, raising their concerns about the local area and some of the challenges that we face. So, there is clearly obviously a lot of activity happening. There is more planned. In the new year, we'll also be consulting, as I say, on the conservation area panels, on the appraisals and management plans. We'll be consulting on the scoping report for the integrated impact assessment, which we also heard about at the last meeting. And we'll also be doing an early call for sites, asking for people to talk about perhaps previously developed land, but also other sites in their local communities, which they think should be considered for future development, and asking about what sort of development should perhaps take place on those sites. So all of this is actually all informal. It's all in advance of the actual formal rounds of public and stakeholder consultation, which Will knows, because we've said that again several times at these meetings, will take place in the summer of next year, intending for that to start in the June. There will then be the Reg 19, which will be the final round of consultation, which will probably be about 12 months after that. So drawing back to the comment in the supporting statement in the committee report on value for money, whilst that is the proposal, what that is indicating scope, and it will be members who will drive this and will decide the programme for additional rounds of public consultation, whether they are generic and cover the full orbit of the local plan, or whether they are on specific geographies or on specific themes, will depend very much on the feedback we get. And actually the consultation feedback is really, really important. And I'm really delighted with the volume of response we've got so far. And some really useful material emerging. Perhaps we can discuss that at a future meeting. In terms of the evidence base is not complete. And indeed, as a result of COVID, as Councillor Manro has indicated, we are having to revisit some of the assumptions made in pieces of evidence that were already produced for the council, particularly on things like housing need, but especially retail need, because the retail sector has obviously been profoundly affected by the events of the last 18 months. So we are doing some further work to check whether or not some of the assumptions that we've made in relation to those key sectors of the economy are correct, and to see whether or not there are further recommendations that we need to take into account. There are still bits of the evidence base which have not been reported upon. Some of those reports have only recently been commissioned. For example, we've got a joint commission with the CCG on health impacts, health studies, health infrastructure. That's only just been commissioned. That will report by March. And all of these reports will all have to come together, and we'll need to assess the implications of all of those before we can begin to pull together the final draft of the local plan. So, you know, Will, I must reassure you that, you know, there is no draft plan because we haven't written it yet, because we're still assembling the evidence which would enable us to justify the approach that we set out in that draft document. And my own view is that when we get to Reg 18 in the summer, there will be some fully formed proposals where there will be supporting evidence which would justify that approach. There will be other bits of evidence which will still have holes or omissions, so we will not be able to present a final view. So we will be inviting comment, and we'll be looking for feedback from the community, from the business community, and from other key stakeholders. And there'll be others where, quite frankly, the evidence is contested and where clearly, you know, there isn't one straightforward approach, and there might be a range of options that we might want to consider. And again, I go back to the example of carbon pricing. You know, I think I and my team nailed our colours to the mast at the last committee that we would like to take a very radical stance in terms of changing the behaviours of the development industry and ensuring that new buildings take account of energy efficiency at the build stage, rather than just paying us a carbon tax, which is what is happening at the moment, so that we get a more optimal outcome. But of course, that then raises the question about what that price might be and what the implications might be in terms of, might that dissuade inward investment? And all of that needs to be considered in the round. So in terms of the specifics around the LDS, SCI and AMR, they will all be published very shortly. I've actually got working drafts of the LDS and SCI on my desk at the moment. I need to do some further consultation with some of my internal stakeholders before we can publish those, but they are being actively prepared. You're aware of the situation on the AMR. We actually have published an AMR for the gap years 2014 to 19. What is missing is the housing trajectory, and that is an absolutely fundamental piece of evidence to all of the work that we're doing on the local plan, and we're working actively to try and get that published again very early in the new year. And just to say, in terms of the local plan it being out of date, can I just remind everyone, the local plan consists of also the London plan as well as our own local plan. And the London plan was finally published after much delay as well, by the way, in March of this year, runs to 600 odd pages plus a slew of supplementary guidance. So we do have in part an up-to-date local plan. What we don't have is a local plan which then reflects those strategic priorities for the capital city and how we will reflect that within the geography of Ealing. And you know, that's the piece of work that we're embarked on at the moment. So to say that, you know, the local plan is out of date and it hasn't been updated for 10 years is not entirely true. The Ealing component, yes, but you know, the London plan is a key plank in our local planning policy. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Steve. Well, I think actually, although we said we weren't going to cover a lot of the points in detail, quite a few of them have been covered there. But I mean, we will have to move on now. But thanks, Will, for your sort of contribution. And as you know, Councillor Manroe has said, you know, you will be getting, you know, a formal written response in the post or in the email or whatever. So thanks very much, Will. Yeah, and feel free to stay for the rest of the meeting if you
might have just come back with a very quick question, please. I do understand you need to make progress, but in the end, I did make a number of requests. When are we going to get these documents published on the website? It is a requirement of the guidance on producing a local plan that those documents are available to the public so the public know what's going on. And they're not there. And that actually is against the statutory guidance for plan making. And that's really what I was asking for.
Okay, thanks. So I think we'll note that, and you know, that yes, those documents do need to be, you know, on the website promptly when they're available. I think we all agree with that. Although some of them are not yet ready, I think is one of the points that has been made, but they should be there when they are ready.
Paul, can I come in quickly?
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
Linda.
okay, yeah, Linda. Just
very quickly.
I
will be quick. The first one is, I think the frustration that people are feeling is because we keep getting told that draft things will get put on the website. So could Steve, not now, but perhaps after this meeting, feed back to the attendees at the meeting some dates of when draft things will be on the website? Because the frustration is felt by lots of people about, we know the end date, but we keep getting told draft things will be given to the planning committee and to the public to see. And as yet, to my knowledge, we haven't got a date as to when they'll be. That would be the first point. And the second point is that the importance of this is because whilst they can't be, you know, absolutely taken into account, planning decisions are being made, one being made last night, which keep saying, well, we can keep making these planning decisions because we haven't got a local plan. And as long as we don't even have any draft things, planning decisions will get made, which I know are against the spirit of the way the local plan is going. So I understand the public frustration on this, because we can't keep saying, well, we wait till the very end before we get anything on the website or to the planning committee. We need some of these drafts to go there.
Okay, thanks, Linda. So yes, okay, we'll note that, and I think, you know, I think we agree that as soon as we have a plan with dates, that the better, really, so people, you know, have an idea of when everything's going to be there.
Can I help, please, Paul, just for a second?
Well, sorry, Arthur, I'm coming to you now. So, yeah, I mean, we will have to move on now because we are running behind schedule, and we do want to give the speakers time to make their points. But we have got another member of the public who I said could make a contribution. So that's Arthur Breens, who you saw just there. And I believe Arthur wants to actually talk about one of the points that we discussed at the last meeting around when we were discussing carbon emissions. But, you know, I have said he could sort of have his say at this meeting. So over to you, Arthur. You've got sort of 3 minutes to have your say.
Yeah, I noticed that Steve went well over 3 minutes, but how for do, as they would say in Sierra Leone. Linda's dead right. We just need a route map with a few target dates, upgraded frequently and sent to us. You can't say you're working on this and you're working on that and you're working on that, and we don't know. It's important that we do know. Let me get on with my quick speech, and I'll do it as quickly as I can. This, ladies and gentlemen, is a brick. Now, surprisingly, this is very energy rich. This is about a 3 kilogram brick, but they vary between 2.2 and between 2.2 and 3.1 kilograms. But most of that has been heated to well over 1,000. So in energy terms, it's worth 5 kilowatt hours. Now, for 5 kilowatt hours, well, between 2 and 5 kilowatt hours, as a minimum, electric car travels 7.3 miles. A petrol car travels about 2.2 miles. The energy in that brick is the same as you boiling your 3 kilowatt electric kettle continuously for 44 minutes. And they're about 2.2 kilowatt hours in 7 kilograms of concrete. The climate emergency means we have to address the future. Steve Barton's talked about Heathrow, but much more important than Heathrow to the planet is that we address this energy consumption in the borough. And we're talking about something that enters the borough and is used in the borough. So I might put petrol in my car, it goes into the car, but it's used in the borough producing carbon dioxide. Everyone's well aware that the council doesn't like that. But a brick comes into the borough with 5 kilowatt energy contained in it, and it's treated very cheaply. It's treated very cheaply in that many buildings that were recently built are ready to be demolished. That's clearly not green. The council do understand this because they've declared a science emergency. The same process occurs when sand, chippings and bricks are brought into the borough. They contain embedded energy. They make up various elements in the construction of buildings, and each one holds its energy cost like a through the life of the building. Half of the lifetime of the carbon emissions of a residential block have been emitted in its construction. So half the energy to go into building goes into its construction. So if you can push off and put back its demolition for replacement, that's a really important thing.
That's 3 minutes.
Okay, and the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors has mentioned this. Demolition is dirty, lazy, and quite opposite to climate emergency. We're talking about the construction industry using 45% of all the carbon dioxide emissions in the country. And that's quite different from what was told to us on the last occasion of this meeting. I'll quickly, because I realise I'm getting very close. The council have told us that for recycling, nothing goes to landfill from Ealing, but that's not true of construction. There are many lorries of 20 tons ploughing up and down the A40 and the A4, taking materials from Ealing and depositing them and throwing away. And these are energy-rich materials. We must be really embarrassed to see that great pile of debris just by the fire station. It amounts to thousands of kilowatt hours of energy just left to be deposited and thrown away. And if I can go on to tree planting, every mature tree is worth thousands of saplings.
Is this your final point, Arthur?
My final point. It's easy to see that because the branches stick out like saplings, but they make an enormous contribution. The council are telling us they're planting thousands of saplings. A mature tree will probably have anything between 5,000 to 1,000 sapling-like branches, which is a major contribution, never considered in any application.
Okay, thanks, Arthur. Well, I think we will have scope for discussing a bit on trees, about trees later on in this meeting. But the main sort of topic you were raising really is about the importance of what is called embedded emissions. We did touch on briefly at the last meeting, and I think we did agree then that there would be a policy on embedded emissions in the draft local plan when it comes out next year. But just to underline that point, I mean, perhaps in the minutes we could note Arthur's contribution and could recommend that the draft policy, in the policy on carbon emissions, it includes embedded emissions and the need to minimise embedded emissions alongside the other carbon emissions that are construction and building related. So if the committee's happy to do that, we can do that. Okay.
Yep.
Thanks. do any councillors have anything to say on this point before we must move on, really? But if there is anyone has a brief point to make, they can do so. Please, please shout out.
Chair, I was just
Okay,
thinking that we
Councillor
could say something. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We could say something about preference for concrete over clay bricks, because there's considerable difference in the emissions. So we could ask the officers to look at something like that to include, maybe.
Yes. Okay. Well, the officers sort of note that what construction materials. I think generally concrete is regarded as not very good as regarding carbon emissions, but
no, it's got very low carbon emissions. There's no firing, I believe. But anyway, worth checking out.
I guess that's something that has to be considered. I think wood is the most environmentally friendly construction material, but so
possibly.
Yeah, I think it is, but so that can be considered as well.
But you have to cut down trees for that, though, don't you?
Yeah, true. But okay, thanks, Councillor Martin. Okay, thanks very much, Arthur. By all means, sort of stay around for the rest of the meeting if you want to, and I think we'll move on to the speakers. So I'll allow the speakers to sort of introduce themselves. But the first one is one of our planning officers, which is Ian Week. So over to you then, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just going to share my screen, so if you just bear with me a second, thanks. Okay, great. Hopefully you can see that. Okay, thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name's Ian Week. I'm a planner in the strategic planning team. So over the next 20 minutes or so, I'm going to try and cover how the green infrastructure approach is being embedded into Ealing's new local plan. I thought I'd start by providing a very short, brief introduction to the concept of green infrastructure, or GI for short, and also attempt to explain what we mean by a GI approach before then providing an overview of emerging and future work to support the preparation of Ealing's local plan around this particular theme. Okay. So I thought I'd start by attempting to establish what we mean by green infrastructure and a green infrastructure approach. I think, speaking from my own perspective, although these are recognisable terms and terms that I frequently use, when I was thinking about this presentation, I did struggle a bit in trying to define them. I think what GI physically represents is perhaps more understandable, but attempting to define what we mean by a GI approach and how that approach differs from previous practice of planning for green space has been a bit more tricky, but I think understanding this is important now. So in a planning context, what do we mean by green infrastructure? So national policy, and that's talking specifically about the NPPF, defines green infrastructure as a network of multifunctional green and blue spaces and other natural features, urban and rural, which is capable of delivering a wide range of environmental, economic, health and well-being benefits for nature, climate, local and wider communities and prosperity. And the London Plan also adopts a similar definition as well. So building on these definitions then, a green infrastructure approach is described as an approach which recognises that the network of green and blue spaces and assets must be planned, designed and managed in an integrated way to achieve multiple benefits and ideally achieve those simultaneously as well. And these benefits can be pretty broad and wide, and that can include things like promoting healthier living, addressing health and social inequalities, improving our resilience to climate change, mitigating pollution, supporting prosperous communities and contributing to a green recovery, also acting as a carbon store, improving biodiversity and ecological resilience, and there's plenty more things that I could list as well, but I'll move on to the next bit. So thinking about these definitions and the approach described, I think there are a number of key principles and themes which I thought would be worth teasing out. And the first is about recognising and maximising the potential of green infrastructure to be multifunctional in use and also in its ability to contribute to achieving multiple benefits. Accommodating multiple functions from the same area of green infrastructure is especially important in urban areas like Ealing, where provision is more limited or scarce. But of course, obviously needs to be managed sensitively as well. And I think related to this first principle is also a focus on outcomes. I think there's a need to plan for green infrastructure in a way which looks beyond just the functional utility of space and to consider its potential to address a kind of wider variety of challenges and issues as well. So for example, if we take a sports pitch, the aim is not just to secure its recreation function, but to consider how it might be planned and managed in a way to achieve other goals, for example, managing flood risk or improving habitat for wildlife and so on. And I think the success of the network and the achievement of such goals is likely to be most effective if green infrastructure is designed as an integrated and connected living network. Enhancing access to green infrastructure networks and reducing fragmentation is a key objective. And I think green infrastructure, which just simply provides a green backdrop or solely acts as a containment zone, for example, it is less likely to provide a range of experiences and therefore benefits. If we consider current national greenbelt policy, for example, it has a very kind of singular, narrow focus around containment, and in practice, sometimes an almost kind of theoretical approach to preserving openness. And that's not to say that greenbelt shouldn't be about containing sprawl, but I suppose the question is, can it and should it be doing more? Are we getting the best out of space as open space? And also, I think I should probably caveat that by saying that, that's not to say space should be used to its maximum intensity either, as that could have unwelcome implications too. The other point to say is that finally, I think green infrastructure should be treated and planned in a comparative way to other infrastructure types. And it may seem odd to describe green space and assets as infrastructure, but it's essential that such spaces and features are seen as integral to the borough's fabric and are subject to the same kind of protections and planning and investment as other more familiar types of infrastructure. So this next slide encapsulates this in a bit more detail, and it's actually sourced from Natural England's Emerging Green Infrastructure Framework, elements of which they actually launched last week. I'm not going to spend more time on it now, but there is a link if people want to explore more information about that. So I think that the challenge for us now in terms of plan making is to ensure that we are embedding this approach and these principles obviously into the work we're doing. I think obviously to bring it back to Ealing, I thought I'd share a few slides to illustrate spatially the geography and extent of Ealing's established green infrastructure and green space network. So this first slide shows the extent of green cover in the borough. And it's actually one of a series of maps that are published by the GLA on green infrastructure. Although I appreciate the borough boundary probably isn't very clear, you should be able to see some of the key kind of defining structural elements of green space in the borough, such as the River Brent and Horsington Hill. And even though you probably can't see the detail, I think it does illustrate at least just how green a borough Ealing is. I think it's fair to say Ealing is synonymous with its green character. We have lots of tree-lined streets, an extensive network of public open space and recreation spaces, and large private suburban gardens as well. And all of these are integral to the structure, a pattern and character of the borough. I think I'll skip the next slide to save a bit of time. So as established, then there are currently a number of policy designations which already exist and which seek to protect and enhance the existing network and secure new provision where possible. And I think these designations are illustrated on this slide, and this is taken from our current policies map supporting our current local plan. So this has got kind of strategic landscape policy designations, which include things like greenbelt and metropolitan open land. It also captures a number of other policy designations like public open space and community open space, and these larger parcels of green space are also linked by green corridors and a blue ribbon network as well. I mean, just to say, this map doesn't represent the full extent of the existing green infrastructure network in Ealing. For example, it doesn't capture nature conservation sites. It also excludes trees, and it also doesn't capture non-designated features assets as well. So the existing network of designated green spaces, as we've got here, this was underpinned by a series of strategies and studies prepared at the time. But most of these strategies and studies have now reached the end of their kind of operational life, basically, and they're no longer deemed to be kind of sufficiently up to date as evidence base to inform our new emerging local plan. And I also think it's fair to say that the scope and approach to preparing the sorts of strategies that have informed this have changed over the past 10 years or so. So both national and regional policy, they now advocate the development of what's called green infrastructure strategies. And these are intended to provide an overarching or umbrella framework for a series of other strategies and plans. And again, this represents somewhat of a departure from past practice of preparing strategies independently. So policy G1, which is set out here of the new London Plan, advises that boroughs should prepare green infrastructure strategies to inform development plan policies. So both the NPPF and the London Plan also make reference to the need to undertake a needs assessment of all open space, and that assessment should take into account all types of open space, including open space which is not publicly accessible or publicly owned. So an assessment's carried out under a green infrastructure strategy tend to be broader in scope than conventional green space strategies, including the green space strategy which we prepared back in 2012. We haven't yet commissioned a green infrastructure strategy, and this, in fact, will be the first green infrastructure strategy that the authority prepares. But we have scoped out this work stream, and the aim is to commence the procurement process early in the new year. So in terms of the overriding objectives of Ealing's new green infrastructure strategy, as I said already, I mean, it first needs to provide an overarching strategy to secure and influence the establishment of an integrated network of green infrastructure in the borough. And obviously that's aligned with the green infrastructure principles I've mentioned already. It also needs to provide an overarching framework for a series of other plans and strategies and work streams. And the GI strategy needs to be informed by these other strategies. But at the same time, it also needs to influence those other strategies as well. And they include things like a new green space strategy, and that will replace the one we prepared in 2012. And the intention, in fact, now is to integrate that with this green infrastructure strategy. So essentially, we're looking to prepare a hybrid strategy this time round. There's also a sports facility strategy underway at the moment, and that was commissioned in July this year, and it's hoped that will be finalised in spring next year. And that covers indoor and outdoor sports facilities, and it's been prepared in line with Sport England guidance. There's also a biodiversity action plan. In addition to that, there's also a review of a network of sink sites, and I'm going to talk about that next. Work is also underway on a Greenbelt and MOL review, and my colleague Ilias is going to provide an update on that as well. So as well as the relationship with the green infrastructure strategy, these individual strategies and work streams are also supporting the development of the local plan by themselves as well. So as well as forming a key part of the evidence base for a local plan, the utility of the green infrastructure strategy is broader than just informing planning policy. So in particular, it will guide and inform the operational work of the council's park service. And so for that reason, the strategy is going to be jointly commissioned by a number of services across the council or across the organisation. So as I say, we haven't yet appointed anyone yet to prepare the strategy, but as a minimum, we would expect it to cover the following core elements and steps set out here. Firstly, it will be necessary to establish the context and drivers for the strategy. And I think one of the most substantive stages in terms of the workload will be the baseline audits of all existing green and infrastructure assets. And the intention is that this will be comprehensive in terms of examining all asset types. So for public open space specifically, for this asset type, that will also be assessed in relation to accessibility, and that will allow us to identify, for example, areas of deficiency based on proximity to such spaces. And people may be familiar with the deficiency mapping which exists within the existing local plan policies map, and obviously the intention is to update those. Obviously, then taking into account any issues identified through the baseline audits, a needs assessment will be undertaken, and these needs will be examined alongside a range of wider contextual factors and issues, and that might cover a range of things from health inequalities, deprivation, poor air quality, flood risk, and so on. And again, this supports that the green infrastructure principles I mentioned previously, specifically about maximising the opportunities for green infrastructure to assist in tackling wider challenges. And I suppose without wanting to labour that point more, I think it's obviously about thinking outside the box and thinking about what the role of green infrastructure is beyond just its principal functions. And obviously this process will allow us to understand what sort of green infrastructure enhancements and interventions are required to assist in addressing such needs and issues. So, and then leading from this, the next step will be to define and identify objectives and opportunities. And this might include recommending quantitative and qualitative targets and standards to assist with the implementation of the strategy. And this might include provision standards. It might include evidencing and recommending local targets for the urban greening factor. And I'll say a bit more on that in a second. And it might also identify priority sites for intervention. And the identification of such opportunities will also provide the evidence to inform other studies, such as the Greenbelt and MWell review. And then this work will then likely culminate in the establishment of proposals and action plans as well, which will identify key initiatives and projects. Okay, I do want to say quickly a bit more about the role of the green infrastructure in examining and evidencing the establishment of local target scores to support the application of the urban greening tool, the urban greening factor tool. So obviously this slide shown here is London Plan Policy G5, and this requires the inclusion of urban greening measures in new developments to increase green cover. And to this end, the Mayor has developed a generic urban greening factor tool to assist boroughs and developers in determining what is the appropriate provision of urban greening in new developments. I'm not going to go into that now because I haven't got much time in terms of going into detail of how this actually works in practice, but I did want to mention that the Mayor is currently consulting on guidance which explains in more detail how this tool operates in practice, and also provides us with some useful guidance around how we go about developing local urban greening factor policies and targets. As detailed in clause B of this policy, so the policy invites boroughs to consider setting local urban greening factor targets, although it does set target scores to be used in the interim as well. So the Mayor's guidance identifies the important role of the green infrastructure strategy in gathering the evidence needed to support target setting, and this exercise could lead to a number of outcomes. The findings might, for example, point to us to stick with the GLA's interim standards and approach, or alternatively, it might support us setting higher standards, or it may point to the need for a more tailored approach perhaps as well. So how might our local policy differ then? I suppose I can start with highlighting those areas where the Mayor's guidance indicates where it shouldn't differ. And specifically, we're required to retain certain elements of policy G5, including the broad calculation method, the surface cover types and surface cover factor values. Those are all fixed and we shouldn't be revisiting them locally. But there are a number of areas where, and this is assuming we have the evidence, we could adopt a different approach locally. So for example, we could expand the application of this tool and policy approach to minor developments. At present, it only applies to major developments, so trigger the policy. It might also be appropriate to consider setting different targets for different locations within the borough, within the LPA area. If there are particular needs in certain parts of the borough, that might be tied, for example, to deficiency areas. The London Plan interim targets also differentiate between residential and commercial developments, but we might also want a more nuanced approach, which is tied to specific use classes or mix of uses. We might also want to look at the form in which the targets take. So as an interim solution, the London Plan recommends the use of benchmark scores, and from our experience applying these to date, one of the issues with these is that no regard is given to the baseline position. So at present, then, the tool doesn't require us to establish a baseline score for the existing situation pre-development, and then to ascertain whether the score for the proposed development actually represents an improvement or not. And I think this is a shortcoming of the current approach. And so it might be appropriate then for us to mandate baseline scoring and apply that alongside benchmarks targets to establish a relative target measured from the baseline. So I also mentioned before, obviously, the green infrastructure strategy provides the overarching umbrella strategy for a number of other strategies and work streams, which either relate to specific components of the GI network or particular objectives. So just in my final, hopefully 5 minutes, I'm just going to quickly talk about one of these other streams and specifically the work we've been doing around nature conservation and the biodiversity. So both national legislation and policy establish a duty on local planning authorities to fully embed the consideration of biodiversity into policy making and decision taking. So through our local plan, we're required to identify, map and safeguard ecological networks, and that network can comprise sites and species. Sites and habitats tend to be easier to map spatially, and so local plans tend to do a better job of mapping those and designating those, although the local plan should also provide a framework for protecting species as well, and that might be informed by spatial data as well. Sites can either be statutory or non-statutory. Statutory sites are also protected through separate legislation, although their status is also material to planning decisions as well. There's only a small number of statutory sites in Ealing, some of which are designated as local nature reserves. So in terms of the designated network in Ealing, most of it consists of sites which are designated as sinks, which are sites of importance for nature conservation, and those are non-statutory designation, and they are identified and established for the local plan, so they are essentially a planning designation. So, and any policy framework we develop locally, that also needs to be supported by the what's called the mitigation hierarchy. And the mitigation hierarchy is a tool and framework which is there to assist both applicants and also decision makers, i.e. ourselves, in limiting as far as possible, the negative impacts of development proposals and projects on biodiversity. And it really is a core tenet of national and regional policy around planning for biodiversity, and it's based around the 4 steps of avoid, minimise, restore and offset. The London Plan also requires us to identify areas of deficiency in access to nature and have a strategy to address this, and in fact the process of identifying and grading sites is deliberately designed to assist with this. So, this slide basically shows the current SYNC network in the borough, which was adopted and published in 2012. But this evidence was actually based on survey work undertaken around 2005-06. So it's obviously quite old now. And obviously, as adopted, there are 102 SYNC sites in the borough. And the different colours here, I know it's probably not easy to see, but the different colours here, they denote the grading. But we also map deficiency in access to nature as well. So a revised network updating the one I've just shown you, that will be published through the new local plan, and this will be supported by a new SYNC review, and the survey work associated with this review is well underway, and it's been underway for a number of years now, and as set out here, we've undertaken it in stages. The methodology for undertaking survey work has followed published guidance and best practice, and that's notably the GLA's guidance and also London Wildlife Site Board's respective guidance. And the survey data is being used to establish whether sites meet the criteria for designation, to determine their grade, and also to provide recommendations for their protection and enhancement. And this survey will also inform any boundary revisions as well. I should say that as well as looking at all the existing sites, we are looking at a significant number of new potential sites as well. So it is quite probable that there will be an increase in the extent of areas protected and designated as sinks, but obviously we've yet to complete the exercise. So, but I expect there will be a sizable increase. So in terms of timescales and next steps, we're hoping to have completed the main survey stages by around February next year. So most sites have been surveyed already, and so What we do now is just plugging any gaps and revisiting certain sites as necessary. And the process of undertaking the sync review requires us to submit the survey data and recommendations to what's called a local site selection panel, and they review and validate the recommendations. That panel hasn't yet been set up, and so that is something we need to action. And as mentioned, the sync network is given effect through the local plan, and so we'll need to consult on the revised network as part of consultation on the local plan, and that should happen at the Reg 18, so the Reg 18 stage in June. I should add too as well that I think the review process is very much an iterative process, and so it's possible that further survey work might be required as we progress through the different stages and we consult on it and get feedback on it. I promise this is my final slide, which is just, I just want to talk very quickly about Biodiversity Net Gain. And I guess most of you will at least have heard of it, even if you're less familiar with the detail. It's probably worth saying actually some of the detail is yet to be worked out and legislated for, and so I think we're all a bit in the dark at the moment. But there is obviously a wealth of evidence out there to show that biodiversity is in decline, and I think I think that is, as a consequence of a number of factors, including developments, poor land management, and climate change. And I think that's despite a shift in planning in recent years to try and maintain a position, a kind of no net loss position. But despite that approach has not been sufficient to stem that decline, or really to realise the value of biodiversity as well. So net gain, in planning terms, it describes an approach to managing and shaping development which leaves the natural environment in a measurably better state than it was beforehand. And DEFRA and Natural England have developed a metric or a tool. So the original one dates back to 2012, but the latest metric they just published, which is metric 3.0. And the metric is a tool which we use to calculate what net gain has been achieved, and it ensures that there are measurably more biodiversity after the development, and it uses habitats as a proxy to determine biodiversity value, and it translates that into a unit score. Now, actually, there are quite a lot of similarities with this and the urban greening factor tool I mentioned previously, but there are some differences as well. The 2019 NPPF already introduced net gain as a material planning consideration, although as policy it's not legally binding, but it is obviously a material consideration. But the Environment Bill, which received royal assent last month, that now introduces mandatory net gain, and that stipulates that all new developments must deliver net gain in biodiversity of 10%, and that's either on site or via offsetting. But there are transitional arrangements, and that means that it actually won't come into effect until probably the end of 2023. And although it will be assessed as part of the planning process, I think it's important to remember that achieving net gain is a legal requirement. In fact, it's actually not part of the planning balance, so it's a non-negotiable, which is a very significant thing to say. And obviously we've been trying to give some thought to what role Ealing's emerging local plan might play in facilitating biodiversity, the application and operation of biodiversity net gain. So obviously, once the mandatory requirements for biodiversity net gain is in place, that will be a legislative requirement, and so there's no need for us to repeat the legal requirements in local policy. That said, we might want to set, or we may want to have a locally specific BNG policy or biodiversity net gain policy for a number of reasons. Firstly, we may want to introduce the requirement prior to mandatory biodiversity net gain becoming operational, although given that our local plan probably won't be adopted until 2023, we would be reliant on draft policies to try and secure that in the interim. And a locally specific policy might also assist us in targeting any off-site biodiversity net gain delivery, and also influence the type of net gain that's been achieved. And as part of the sync review, we've also been establishing baseline unit scores for all our sync sites, and that's going to provide really useful evidence to facilitate the operation of the biodiversity net gain approach. And the sync review it's also identifying opportunities for enhancement, and that will also assist us in determining where best to target off-site compensation. So where best should we be, where best to absorb off-site compensation. But one I suppose one particularly important thing we might want to consider and examine is whether there's a basis and scope to set a target which exceeds the current mandatory 10% minimum requirement. And a number of authorities across the country are currently examining this. Obviously, a higher target would need to be tested in terms of feasibility and viability, and we need to do additional evidence work around that to support those options. Obviously, mindful of the time, I think I will pause and stop there. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Well, I mean, there's a lot covered there around sort of urban greening and biodiversity, and rather a lot of ground. Can I suggest, as we've got three more sort of speakers lined up, and we need a chance to hear them all. Maybe it would be best to wait until all of the planning officers have spoken and then to raise questions to them as a group, because I think these presentations will
Paul,
sort of,
I'm just being
I think we're going to get bogged down and not cover the whole agenda. Okay.
Sorry, Paul.
But,
could I just say, could they just be timed? Because otherwise there's not going to be any chance to ask any questions.
Yeah.
I'm just conscious of time.
Yes,
that was a brilliant presentation, but if they're all as long as that,
well, we won't have time. That's it. Yeah. So okay. Well, I think that the second. So please hold your sort of any questions you have at that point and raise them later, and Ian and other officers will have a chance to answer them. Well, the second officer that was scheduled to speak according to the published agenda isn't actually available. But I think it's Brian, is it, that is stepping in to speak for him? So, Brian, are you ready?
Seva was, sorry, Chair. Seva was due to present on the sports facility strategy. Because of time, it may, I mean, I'm aware of it and I'm familiar with it, but I don't have a presentation as such. It may be easier to pick it up in questions at the end. I mean, just to say there is an update, a short update within the committee report, which kind of sets out kind of where we are with that piece of work. So that provides some of the detail there already, but as I say, I'm happy to field questions after.
Okay, that's okay, so there is Ilias, who is sort of scheduled to speak. So Ilias, can you perhaps just introduce yourself first and then move on to your presentation?
I will do. Thank you, Chair. I'm going to share my screen with you. Can you all see it okay?
Well, I can see it, yes.
Okay, so my name is Elias Trivilas. I'm a principal planning officer, and I will give you a brief presentation on the work we're currently doing for the Greenbelt and Metropolitan Upland Review. I will start with a bit of context on Greenbelt. The idea of Greenbelt is quite old. It goes back almost a century and was first born out of Ebenezer Howard's Garden Cities movement. But it was not until the 1947 Town and Country Planning Act that provisions were formally passed for greenbelts. At the point of its implementation in 1955, the concept of greenbelt had changed considerably from the original vision, which was to create publicly accessible open spaces for recreation purposes for the population of London. It had changed to instead forming a significant barrier to the physical expansion of London outwards. Greenbelt was essentially intended to act as an urban containment zone. In contrast to the original vision, it was recognized that such space did not need to be of good quality or even accessible to the public in many cases. These general principles have largely remained constant since then, and they remain central to current national policy. Today, the National Planning Policy Framework states that the fundamental aim of the Green Belt is to prevent urban sprawl by keeping land permanently open. Once established, the Greenbelt boundaries should only be altered where there are exceptional circumstances, which are fully evidenced and justified, and that should be done through the preparation or updating of plans. Strategic policy should establish the need for any changes to Greenbelt boundaries. And this is important, and no, it is the key reason we're doing this review now as we prepare for the new local plan. The London Plan reflects much of the guidance within the NPPF and states that the Mayor strongly supports the continued protection of London's Greenbelt and its enhancement. But despite having clear regional significance as a policy designation, the process of drawing up and reviewing the boundaries has been left to the individual boroughs. In terms of metropolitan open land, it is afforded the same level of protection as Greenbelt, but its policy basis is distinct, deriving instead from the regional spatial strategy for London, which is the London Plan. Going back to the origins of metropolitan open land, the Greater London Development Plan of 1976 described MOL as areas of open land that are of significance for Greater London as a whole. The GLDP provided no statutory policy guidance on MOL and called on boroughs to define the boundaries in their local plans, which led to considerable variation between boroughs in how boundaries were defined. And the differentiation between Greenbelt and MOL was frequently blurred, and now this is very much happening today as well. Within Ealing, MOL was first defined in the adopted 1986 Borough Plan, but like Greenbelt, the extent of MOL in the borough as it was originally defined has largely remained unchanged since then. Looking at the Ealing context, Ealing has approximately 868 hectares of MOL, 23 sites in total, which cover approximately 16% of the total area of the borough. In addition to that, we have approximately 309 hectares of Greenbelt, which cover approximately 6% of the total area of the borough. In terms of Greenbelt, other outer London boroughs with similar geographically position to Ealing, that is, they are outer London boroughs but not at the edge of London, such as Brent and Merton, have no Greenbelt designations at all. In terms of MOL, Ealing has the third highest amount of MOL land out of the 19 outer London boroughs, and the fourth highest out of all 33 London boroughs. Ealing has several small to medium-sized MOL sites, whereas, for example, our neighbors Hounslow only have a handful of large MOL sites. And again, this highlights sometimes the inconsistency in how the designations have been applied across London. This map here shows our Greenbelt sites designated as GB and our MOL sites designated as MOL. And it also shows some sites which are designated new that we are considering as part of this review whether or not they should have an MOL designation. The purpose of the study is to provide a comprehensive and up-to-date review of the borough's Greenbelt and metropolitan open land sites. And we haven't undertaken such a comprehensive review since these were defined many, many decades ago. It is therefore important to do this now to ensure that all sites have the appropriate designations in accordance with NPPF and the London Plan criteria, ensure there is consistency and transparency in the way that designations are assigned to the borough's major green open spaces, to recommend any appropriate boundary adjustments or changes in designation in accordance with the findings of an up-to-date assessment of all our sites, to identify opportunities to enhance open space to meet the current and future needs of our residents and visitors, and to inform the preparation of our new local plan. We should stress that the purpose of the study is not to release Greenbelt or MOL land for development. Even where the assessment may identify that the site does not meet the criteria for Greenbelt or MOL designation, there are several other designations which provide protection to Ealing's open spaces, such as public open space, community open space, green corridor, blue ribbon network, etc. Therefore, the aim is to ensure that each site has the appropriate designation that reflects its location and function. The primary objective is to enhance our strategic green open spaces. However, in some cases, and where exceptional circumstances exist, and these are fully evidenced and justified, some limited enabling development may be required to enhance the function, usability, and accessibility of some of our strategic green open spaces. A brief summary of our approach to the study. The national and regional policy identified the defining purposes and functions of Greenbelt and MOL, but there is no guidance around how to interpret this and how to approach a GB-MOL review. This is left to the individual planning authorities, which need to determine how to best undertake this. In terms of our Greenbelt and MOL review, we have adopted a sequential three-stage approach. Stage 1, which we are currently undertaking, is assessing all Greenbelt and MOL sites against the NPPF and London Plan criteria respectively. It will consider any appropriate boundary corrections and potential designation changes based on the findings of this assessment. We're also considering potential new MOL designations as part of Stage 1. Stage 2, which will follow after the completion of Stage 1, will consider opportunities for enhancing Greenbelt and MOL sites. And Stage 3, if necessary, will consider what limited enabling development may be required and appropriate to achieve the enhancements that we identify in Stage 2. It will also consider whether there is evidence of any exceptional circumstances that would justify the limited release of Greenbelt or MOL to meet unmet need, firstly for recreation uses, but also potentially for housing, employment, social infrastructure, or gypsy traveler accommodation. The review is undertaken by our strategic planning team with support from consultant Sarup, and we're expecting the review to be completed by May 2022. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Ilias. Okay, well, I think, as I said earlier, if we hear all of the speakers and then we take questions to them as a group at the end, that would be the best way to proceed, I think. So I think now we've got our external speaker, who is Russell Curtis. So Russell, I believe, is a director of RCKA Architects, if I've pronounced that correctly.
You have.
And
thank you, Chair.
He's the author of a study called Golf Belt, which has some interesting ideas on what we can do with the golf courses that we have in London, including in Ealing. So I think he's going to tell us a bit more about that. So over to you then, Russell.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you everyone for having me this evening. Can you all see my screen?
Well, I can see it very clearly.
You can. Okay. Well, I assume that's everybody then. So yeah, thanks a lot. And I'm just going to. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to whiz through this as quickly as I can. But just to give you a bit of context, I live in Barnet, and right on the edge of London. And during lockdown, my daily walks at lunchtime, I was exploring the area around me. I've lived there for 15 years, but you know, there are a lot of parts of my green space around where I live which are inaccessible, and mainly because they're golf courses. And so I thought it would be worthwhile looking across London at courses and understanding a bit more about them, how big they are, how much space they take up. And over time, I developed a piece of research, which I'm going to take you through quickly now. Now, I apologise if any of you are golfers, and this is deliberately provocative, and you'll forgive me for this, and hopefully it will stimulate some discussion.
options. But if we look at just next slide. So yes, if we look across London as a whole, there are currently 96 active courses. Around half of those are owned by public bodies. The red ones that you can see there are owned by, it's mainly London boroughs that they're located within. I'm talking about the freeholds in terms of the ownerships. The yellow ones, a few of them are owned by other types of public body, and the green ones are privately owned. But if you add all these together, the total area of all the courses across London, you come up with a total an area of about 4,300 hectares, and about 1,600 of those are owned by public bodies. Just as a comparison, Brent itself is about the same size as all of London's golf courses added together. So the whole of Brent, which is a sort of mid-size London borough. Across London, the types of open space that we see is predominantly, as you expect, parks and gardens. So around 11,000 hectares of space is parks and gardens. Playing fields take up about 5,500. Golf courses are the third largest use of green space in London, which is an extraordinary area when you think how green London is as a city. And these aren't protected green spaces. These are all green spaces from the Ordnance Survey. The Ordnance Survey has a sort of special map of all of this distribution of land across London, green space, specifically in cemeteries, allotments, and churchyards and burial grounds take up most of the rest. So there we go. So golf courses are a third largest use of land, taking about 4,300 hectares. And looking more closely, I've just handpicked a few boroughs to take you through. So Bromley has the greatest number of courses of all the London boroughs. It has 11, 3 of which are owned by the council, the freeholds owned by the council, totaling about 600 hectares, which is 4% of the borough's total area. Now, on the map on the right, you can see the green space that I've identified there is designated green belt, as Ilyas was talking about earlier. Richmond has the highest proportion of its land taken up by golf courses, 7%. Not quite so much green belt, but you've got some protected land here around the Richmond Park. And 3 of its courses are owned by the council itself, around 90 hectares. So on to Ealing. Ealing has 6 active courses with a total area of 200 hectares, 3.75% of the total area of the borough. The freehold to 3 of these owned by the council, and 178 hectares of golf courses within the borough are designated as metropolitan open land. Typically, across London, golf courses are either fall within greenbelt or are entirely designated as MOL. So they tend to fall into one of those 2 categories. Enfield, this is the final borough, but I'm going to zoom in on this a little bit. Enfield, which is just next to where I live. I'm in Barnet, but just over the border. We've got 7 courses here, 4 of which are owned by the council. Now, interestingly, Enfield is going through its local plan review at the moment, and is proposing taking a huge area of greenbelt out, or de-designating a large area of greenbelt out for development, around 180 hectares. Interestingly, that's also the total area of all of the council-owned golf courses. The orange ones you can see there, 3 of which do sit within greenbelt. Just to give you an idea of, some of you are golfers, I perhaps, and you'll understand how big golf courses are, but just for those who are not familiar with how big courses are, Enfield Golf Course sits within quite close to Enfield Town Centre. The freehold's owned by the council, and the club pays about £13,500 rent per annum for the privilege of using this space. That's roughly the same as a 2-bed flat in the same area. and yet Enfield has 10,500 people on its in temporary accommodation and 4,500 households on its waiting list. That's Wembley Stadium, sitting on Enfield Golf Course. This is only a medium-sized golf course. These things are absolutely ginormous. That's Brent Cross, for those of you who know Brent Cross and shop there occasionally. One of London's biggest buildings, the XL Centre, fits within it quite comfortably. But if you look at this, look at the dots that I've just applied onto that image there, that's the MOL designation. So this is Metropolitan Open Land. So the whole of this course falls within Metropolitan Open Land. But 50% of it also lies within the London Plan Policy H2. Now, the Policy H2 is about small sites. So it's the new London Plan has a specific policy around small sites. Now, obviously, this isn't a small site, but it uses quite a useful way of designating or of establishing the accessibility of land for development. So it defines a site suitable for intensification as being within 800 metres of a station or a tube, or 800 metres of a high street boundary, or with a PTAL, a public transport accessibility level of 3 or more. And half of this course fulfills that criteria. So they're not all sort of sites which are in the middle of nowhere. Quite a lot of these courses sit within areas that are highly accessible. Ilias has just talked about MOL, so I won't dwell on this too long, but that's basically a map of all of the MOL from across London. It's around 10% of total London's total area, and of this, 10% is given over to golf. MOL must, under the London Plan, in order to designate any green space or any space as MOL, it must do one of 3 things, really. So it must be one of 4 criteria. It must contribute to the physical structure of London by being clearly distinguishable from the built-up area. It must include open area air facilities, especially for leisure, but which must serve either the whole or significant parts of London, and that's an important point, so I underlined it. And it must contain features or landscapes, historic, recreational, or biodiverse, of either national or metropolitan value, and it must form part of a green chain or link to the network of green infrastructure and meet one of those above criteria. I talked about policy, London Plan Policy H2 earlier, but that's essentially what the definition in the London Plan is. And this covers quite a large area of London, as you'd expect. Most of the inner London boroughs fall within this designation, and as you move out from the centre, the areas tend to be clustered around stations. As you can see, some of these circular blobs in the outer boroughs. The reason I'm using this is because, as I said, it's an interesting, quite useful, easy metric for assessing the accessibility of sites. And there you can just see all of the golf courses which fall within that Policy H2 area. That's about 1,600 hectares. Now, I thought, well, we know that these golf courses exist, we know where they are, we know how accessible they are. So if one were to just take a very sort of hypothetical look at this, how many homes might we fit on them? And based on reasonable densities, this isn't building towers everywhere, but sort of mid-rise, high-density development, I reckon that building on the public courses alone within the H2 zone could house around 34,000 homes, housing over 100,000 people. But importantly, I believe that with innovative design, this could also maintain the integrity of the MOL in terms of its spatial characteristics, improve biodiversity, and deliver social value. And just thinking about the size, if Regent's Park were to become a golf course, it could only be used by 105 people at any one time, given the amount of space that a golfer requires to hit the ball around because of safety reasons, or a maximum of 350 people per day. But in actual fact, even the latest figures I could find were from 2007, Regent's Park was getting 26,000 visitors each day. So if you take a typical golf course, one golfer might take up around 1.6 hectares of space. That's the kind of area that they need to occupy. But that could, at reasonable densities, provide homes for 380 people. So I published this research in August, and it went a bit viral. Interestingly, on the 26th of August, when the Guardian featured it, it was the second most read article on the Guardian's international website after the fall of Kabul. So there's clearly an appetite for this kind of discussion around how we might use open space more productively. And the point I made in this article, in the Guardian article, is that this isn't, I'm not proposing that we build on all the golf courses in London. I'm simply asking that we have a sensible debate about whether golf courses really offer an equitable use of land. My work has demonstrated that you can have a bit of everything. You can deliver some new homes, you can rewild, you can achieve biodiversity net gain, you can provide vital social infrastructure, all of these things, without compromising on too many things that make London special. And if you are a golfer and you live in outer London, I mean, within 5 kilometres of London's outer edge, there are another 74 courses. So we're not short of space for playing golf. And this is an image of a project we're working on. It's a greenbelt site, so it's in Epping Forest as it happens, but it's a site that's been removed from greenbelt in the local plan. It was a green field. We've got this going to committee at the beginning of January, but this is an example of a scheme where we're building clusters of high density residential and achieving biodiversity net gain, and improving access to local residents. And this will be an open park that people can wander through. At the moment, it's all fenced off, so we can achieve these things if we really set our minds to it. I've done a directory there's a much more detailed piece of work on my website there, with a directory of all of the boroughs, every single one of the 96 courses in London, with statistics around housing capacity and all that sort of stuff. So I'd encourage you to have a look if you're interested. I appreciate that was an extremely quick canter through the work, but thanks for listening to me.
Okay, thanks very much then, Russell. I don't know if there are any golfers on the committee, but if there are, maybe they'll have some views that they want to share with us shortly. So thanks for that presentation. I'll throw the meeting open now to questions and discussion. So can councillors who want to say something please put up their hands, ideally their sort of virtual hand. If that doesn't work, just try putting up your actual hand. I will flip between the screens and see if I can spot everyone. I can see a few hands going up already. Okay, well, so far I've got Councillor Burke, Councillor Shaw, Councillor Martin, and Councillor Woodruff. So I think we'll take those first in that order. So Councillor Burke, go ahead, please.
Okay, a couple of questions for 2 different speakers. The first one is for the first speaker, and that's around, it all sounded really, really good, that whole strategy. Just again, the same question really that I've asked before is, how long will it be before we have an interim plan or strategy? And therefore, how long will it be before that actually is taken into account in terms of what we're doing, i.e. lots of things might have been built by the time it's happened. And then my second question is, I got slightly anxious about that Greenbelt MOL presentation, particularly hearing the speaker afterwards who said Enfield had got rid of half of theirs. Not half of theirs, that's exaggeration. But I presume there is no indication that we will be removing or getting rid of MOL or Greenbelt. That would seem hugely contradictory to the first speaker. So they're my 2 questions.
Okay, thanks, Linda. Okay, Ian, do you want to have a go at responding to those? I think there was I think one of those was for you and one was for Ilias.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, that's a good question. As I say, we haven't yet commissioned the green infrastructure strategy, but obviously we have been commissioning, or we have a number of other strategies underway already. So things like the green, obviously the Greenbelt review, MOR review, the SYNC review, a sports facility strategy, and so on. In terms of the overarching strategies, this green infrastructure strategy, obviously the intention is to try and procure early in the new year, and I suspect, because of the nature of these strategies and because it involves essentially an audit of all our green infrastructure assets, which is quite a big kind of task in itself, and also it's important that we time that audit appropriately as well, in terms of when spaces are used and so on. So that may well have a bearing on when we can kind of finalise the strategy. But I expect we would have some outputs in time for our the Reg 18 consultation on the local plan, which is, we're kind of aiming for June at the moment. So by that point in time, we will have some of the initial outputs I'd anticipate. So, and that will then start to inform obviously that initial kind of policy drafting at that stage. Obviously, bearing in mind that there's a further round of consultation, the Reg 19 consultation, which will probably happen a year later. So obviously between that time, obviously we will finalise the strategy, and obviously that will then inform that iteration of the local plan. As I say, those other work streams are already underway. Things like the SYNC review, the main survey work is pretty much 95% done. So we will be the next step for that is to set up a local site selection panel. Again, something we need to do in the new year. They will validate the findings, and then those findings will result in a new, a revised network, and then which we will consult on at Reg 18 in June on the local plan. I think that probably covers it.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I think there was one for you, Ilias, on metropolitan open land.
Yes, I think now we try to make it quite clear that the purpose of this study is not to release Greenbelt or MOL land for development. That's quite clear. And the other point we made quite clear is that no, we are keen to explore opportunities to enhance our Greenbelted MOL sites. However, in order to get to a position to do that, we need to undertake a systematic, strategic, comprehensive review of our sites, because since they were designated many decades ago, we have never done that. So it is not a question of protecting the sites, it is about ensuring they have the correct designation. So this is pretty much the key purpose of the study, because having the wrong designation can lead to all sorts of other problems, especially when it comes to planning applications, and if we don't have the correct designations, we will not be able to defend our sites and to protect our sites.
Okay, that's reassuring. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Ilias. Does that cover your questions, Linda?
It does, thank you. I'd be really pleased that we see that in the minutes, that the purpose is not to reduce it.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
These can democratic services note that and put that in the minutes, then please. I don't know if you want to add anything, Russell, or should we move on to the next question?
No, I mean, a point I didn't really make, and perhaps I should have done, is that the principal issue that I have with these courses, they're just not accessible to people, and they're also not very biodiverse. So in reassessing the courses, there's perhaps an opportunity to achieve all of these in order to make them more accessible to people: cycle routes, allotments, parks, rewilding, and improve biodiversity, which is a key issue that we need to achieve.
Completely agree. We should throw that into the mix. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Russell. Okay, Councillor Shaw, you're next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I have a couple of questions. One, first of all, just for Ian, I just wanted a bit of clarity on, you mentioned in the urban greening factor that the London plan requires major, it's required for major schemes, and the local plan could take on, or look at smaller developments. Sorry, just one moment. Sorry, I had some young children interrupting me there. That was the background noise. Yeah, and I was just wondering what the definition of the major scheme and smaller schemes were. I believe in the London plan, if I remember correctly, sort of above 10 dwellings was a major development. So I was just wondering if that's the same as a major scheme or not. If you could just clarify that, please, Ian. And then in the sports strategy, I know that it's not really your bag, Ian, but the report mentions that it's hoped this could come to Cabinet in spring. So I was just wondering, how it was going on, and what stage it was at and what update there was. It started in July in the summer, the report mentions. But, sort of saying we hope it goes to Cabinet in spring, does that mean that will happen, or might that drag on into summer and autumn of next year? I know that you might not necessarily know that, so it might be best sort of circulated to members of the meeting at a later date via email. That'll be fine. And finally, for Russell, I will have to declare that I have been a golfer in the past, not a particularly good one. I've been describing myself as a golfer as going a bit far, probably. But I did actually read the Guardian article as well, and I do think it's very interesting. And I think what's an important point here is that there is a huge oversupply of golf courses as well right across the country, that it really grew through the 70s and 80s, and then went into decline in the later 90s in terms of participation. And I suppose some of what could be done there is based around the sort of economics of the golf courses, where some golf courses have gone under and struggled as it is, and what participation levels are like on the golf courses throughout London. And that, I was wondering if he had any details of that, or whether perhaps that's some data that he's got that's on the website and so on. So thanks, that's all.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Shaw. Okay, well, I think there's one for you, Ian, and the second one that maybe you can have a go at, Ian, and then a question for Russell. So Ian first.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the urban greening factor, yeah, you're absolutely correct, Councillor Shaw. Major is anything in residential terms, at least, is anything with 10 or more units. And so obviously the one option I was suggesting we may wish to explore is whether we extend the scope of that policy to also capture minor developments as well. In terms of the sports facility strategy, as I mentioned, the work kicked off in July this year. The consultants Continuum who are doing that, they've done a lot of the survey work, and they've done a lot. Essentially, they've done much of the audit part of it. They have been looking at need as well, particularly looking at things like demographics as well. I know we've been on our side in planning, we've been supplying them with further information in that respect. Certainly the lead on it, I don't want to put them on the spot, but they're not here anyhow, but the lead on it from our park service is that they are fairly confident that you know, that things are progressing well, and so the kind of expectation is, and the hope is that, you know, by around springtime, that exercise will be completed, and would be, there's a commitment to report it to cabinet. So and so I think, you know, all going well, you know, we will be able to hit that time scale. So as I say, most of the work, I mean, the kind of lion's share of it at least has been done. So yeah.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Russell, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. I mean, those are excellent questions. You're absolutely right. There has been actually an uptick in golf participation during the pandemic, but that's sort of a slight anomaly, I think, in gradual decline over the last few decades. And what I've been surprised about, as you can imagine, getting the press that this piece did, is how positive a lot of the golfers and golf clubs have been to what I'm proposing. Because you're absolutely right, there are clubs vary hugely. Some are very successful, commercial concerns, others are really struggling. And there is a sort of acceptance that perhaps some consolidation might be useful. Maybe that you know, it's perfectly possible to reduce an 18-hole course in size and then release some land for other uses, and still maintain 18 course, which actually makes 18-hole course makes it more attractive because it doesn't take so long to play, and it makes it more accessible to people who maybe you know, haven't got so much time. And interestingly, you may be aware, but Lewisham's only golf course a few years ago was turned into a public park. The council took the decision to convert the Beckenham Place Park, which was a golf club, into a public park, and it's been very successful. So there are precedents for this stuff across London.
Okay, thanks, Russell. I think if that covers your questions, then Gareth, I'll move on to.
It does, thanks, Chair. Yeah.
Okay, to Councillor Martin. Oh, we can't hear you very well, Dee. I'm not sure what the problem is.
I've got a few questions. So I suppose that overall tonight, I suppose can't you? Shall I lean in a bit? Can you hear me any better?
I could hear that last
bit. Try it without the camera, Chair. Can you hear me better? I'll try it without the camera in case it's my broadband. But so I'm starting to get to wonder about where, you know, how we're going to square the different sort of requirements or needs for green spaces, as we've been talking about them tonight, and how we might want to prioritise those. So there's obviously use for leisure, there's use for sports, there's rewilding, there's habitat retention and hopefully creation. How are we going to think about how we will almost grade those and determine how we're going to use the land and continue to use the land? Because I'm pleased to hear that we're going to move away from no net loss, because I think it is important that we do more than we're doing now, and there's a lot of work to do on that. So maybe Ian can answer that one. But also in Ilias's report, he talked about stage 2, was talking about enhancements. What do we mean by enhancements? And in stage 3, we talked about possibly other developments in order to fund those enhancements. One of the points made in the report was that we'd only use it for housing when it was needed and essential. Well, I don't know a time when it won't be needed and essential, so I suspect we need a bit more protection than that. And just briefly touching on Russell's presentation, I mean, I live near one of the, I'm not a golfer, but I live near one of the public golf courses. It isn't just used by golfers, it's used by a lot of local people. It's particularly well used during COVID, when people were encouraged to go there for leisure. At the end of the day, it's part of our green lungs as a city. And whilst I might support it being used for rewilding, I think I would have concerns for it being developed as a housing estate, even in part. So that's my contribution. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Dee. Okay, well, there's a number of quite sort of major sort of questions there. So perhaps we'll give everyone in turn a chance to answer. Okay, Ian, you go first. On those points, yeah.
Thank you. No, they are very good points. I suppose it comes back to the kind of points I was trying to emphasise in my presentation around the kind of green infrastructure principles, and particularly the kind of principle about multifunctionality of green infrastructure, and that means both in terms of you know, the functions it can accommodate, but also in terms of the benefits it can derive as well. You know, I think obviously in an urban area like London, albeit to the edge, an outer London authority, although we have, as I showed on the image in terms of our green cover, although there is a wealth of a green space, it is still limited. I suppose there are limited opportunities to create significant areas of new open space. So I think that's probably unlikely. I mean, not to say that there won't be some opportunities, but I think by and large, I think that's probably unlikely. But I think it's about looking at what we have and making that work better, enhancing enhancing the existing network and the existing provision, and that's trying to secure access to that provision if it's not publicly accessible. Trying to enhance the quality of facilities and functions that space accommodates. Looking at its kind of biodiversity function and value as well, and obviously trying to enhance that. I mean, there are clearly sensitivities in terms of trying to intensify the use of open space, and I think we obviously need to be mindful of that. And even though it might be suggested that that kind of approach is suggesting a kind of a more intensive use of space. It can be done, I think, sensitively to try and minimise unwelcome impacts, basically. But I think that's something we need to manage and consider. Does that cover the points?
Yeah, I think so, Ian. Yeah, I think perhaps let's see what Ilias has to say.
Yes, I think there was a question about stage 2, which is about enhancing our green belted MOL sites, and also about stage 3. So as part of this review, we have been going out and visiting all of our green belted MOL sites. And we have identified that there are quite a few issues that relate to poor accessibility, to derelict sites, that some of them are just used for fly tipping. There are some GB and MOL sites that are not very green at all in places, with lots of tarmac and significant inappropriate uses, which include a few examples: a petrol station, quite a lot of housing, a number of inappropriate business uses, etc. So we have this idea in our mind that greenbelt is this beautiful green open space, but the reality can be quite different in places. So we want to ensure that our green open spaces can be enjoyed by our residents and visitors. For example, our children can play there. People of all ages can use them for sports or leisure activities. Now, we understand that in order to go ahead with some of the enhancements that the review will identify, there will be a cost involved, and that's why we are proposing to consider if there are opportunities to enhance sites. Could some very limited enabling development allow us to do this? So I think there is discussion to be had on how do we enhance our sites, and what are the means? And could this be one of the arguments that should be discussed? In terms of stage 3, again, if we have identified opportunities for enhancement, then we need to discuss how we will do that. But beyond that, we know that the borough is facing very significant pressures across many areas. We all are aware of housing, but it's not just housing. It's also about social infrastructure, things like schools. For example, I will tell you my personal experience. My son is going to William Perkin High School, which a few years ago was one of these sites. So do we think that it is something that we should be considering if there is an overwhelming need for a school in that area, that maybe one of the MOL sites could be used to accommodate that school? So I think these are the sorts of discussions and conversations and considerations we need to have as part of this review.
Okay, thanks, Ilias. Okay, well, people may be aware we are just starting to overrun a little, but there are some people that still want to ask questions. So I'd like to take those if people don't mind. If people do, if someone does need to leave, then please do. But if everyone else is happy to stay for just a few minutes more, we'll get all of the questioners in. So there was a question there for you, Russell. So if you remember that. So
yes, well, I'm not sure it was a question, but I mean, I agree completely. I think that clearly what I'm proposing is not just a blanket policy for all of the golf courses in London. Everything needs to be assessed on a case-by-case basis. My frustration, I think, and the reason that stimulated this work was the fact that under lockdown, an awful lot of these courses were completely closed and nobody could benefit from. Not even the golfers were able to benefit from them. And so, it's great to see that some of these courses are opened up for non-golf uses and people to walk on and whatever. But that's not always the case. But I agree with you completely.
Okay, thanks, Russell. Okay, well, I've got a couple more people that indicated that they had questions. I can see Libby Kemp, who's a member of the public, and Councillor Manroe, who is obviously still with us. Does anyone else want to ask a question? Or
I think Councillor Woodruff is at his hand.
Sorry, and Councillor Woodruff is still in the queue. Yeah. Okay, so I hadn't forgotten you, Councillor Woodruff.
Oh yes, you had.
but I was just wanted to know to identify all of the other questioners before we moved on. So is there anyone whose name?
Chair, I'm not able to raise my hand, but I will do my contribution in the last very quick clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so first of all, Councillor Woodruff, then Libby, then Councillor Manroe, and then Councillor Mahmood. So it's your chance now, Councillor Woodruff.
Well, it's really just general comments, really. I mean, aware that we are an advisory committee and we've just had some excellent presentations, quite heavily detailed, where a lot of the stuff is set in stone because it's London Plan. The government was going to produce a white paper. Michael Gove's gone off to rewrite it. So quite a lot of it is we don't really have much about. But I think Mr. Week sort of went through, there were one or two things when he said we might want to work out, I've scribbled down things like targets, baseline scoring, and I'm not sure as advisory committee whether we're being asked to, whether those sort of things should be going in. He just made a number of comments, so I'm a bit unclear about that as our role as advisor. I think the golf, you're not the first person to come up with this golf. I've been a councillor for a long time. You ain't the first person to come up. There's been a lot of controversy about it. You want to push it, best of luck to you is all I can say. But I'm not a golfer. But let's say this, I've met an awful lot of people who are. But I think it's really just whether what sort of advice we should be giving, really.
Okay, thanks, Sir Simon. I mean, this committee can't take any decisions, but we can make recommendations. So if there is a specific recommendation, someone would like the committee to make, then sort of please suggest it.
Well, no, because it's
But
quite
you
a
just
big
wanted to-
presentation. We ran through quite a few things. I was thinking whether we might want to do that. So I think it's been a bit difficult to come up with it. I mean, if you present, if you send the presentations, I might be able to find something later on, but I think it's a bit tricky at the moment.
Okay, well, does anyone want to respond to Simon's point? I mean, I think it's obviously a very good point, and it's something we need to consider, later on, what sort of, if the committee does want to make recommendations on these sort of topics. Go ahead, Ian. Did you?
Yeah, just very quickly. I think the reason I posed it in that way, in terms of these options that we want to explore, is because that evidence base is still emerging, and it's still in its infancy. So I think, and as others, Steve said early on, obviously we have the London plan is part of our development plan. Obviously that sets a series of a suite of policies already, which we work within. And I think what we're kind of posing, I guess, or what I was posing was, do we want to go further than the kind of baseline kind of policy position set through the London plan? And in fact, the London plan encourage, I mean, some of the examples I gave around things like urban greening factor and so on. I mean, the London plan encourages authorities to develop their own target scores, and to develop their own kind of policy approach. So so I think there is a basis upon which we can and perhaps should be doing that. So but I think as that evidence emerges, and we explore those options, maybe that's something we can perhaps look to take back to this committee or forum in the future, perhaps.
Okay, thanks, Ian. I mean, obviously these would be questions, not so much ones to be answered by the committee as ones that we need to answer, as part of the wider process of putting together this plan and consulting with the public and stakeholders and so on. But I suspect, that my feeling of the mood of this committee is that we probably, in answer to that question, do we want to go beyond the requirements in the London plan? I think the mood would be that yes, that we do, at least to some extent. So I hope members of the committee feel that I'm sort of correct in sort of summing up the mood like that. Okay, well, I've got at least one thumbs up to that. Okay, does anyone else want to say anything in response to Simon Woodruff, or I move on to Libby Kemp? Libby, go ahead with your.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think you can really separate the green and open space from the climate change last week, and I think they feed into each other, and many times should be part of each other. So looking at sort of green space and amenity space for residents, the boroughs with the lowest space per 1,000 person per hectare are South Acton, Ealing, Central Ealing and Southall Broadway. And these are the places that have had the most development. And in fact, at the planning meeting the other month, the planning officer started the meeting for a particular development as Southall, saying, well, it hasn't got enough amenity space, but it doesn't matter because they can use the park across the road, or words to those effect. Well, that's really bad because we need the amenity space. And I'm really concerned that in certain areas where there's been heavy development, it's all very well saying with climate change, the rich developers can pay us more money for carbon swapping or whatever, but that does not take the heat away that's going to be developing in between these buildings. And I think South Acton Estate, that area is going to be really bad. There is no green space there at all. There's a bit of plastic muga, which is even worse in the ground. So when it gets hot, although the developers might have paid a lot of money to be able to build there for the carbon, whatever it is, that will not help the environment whatsoever. I just think we need to be aware that where we're building, where it is heavily developed, we need to look more. And the developers show these lovely plans, but it's all hard landscaping. And if they put a tree, it's usually in a concrete pot, which means somebody has to water that tree all the time. So we should look at it. But what I really wanted to say about this was that the green space strategy also goes down to gardens and people's drives. And BBC COP programme mentioned this and said it's all very well planners and things planning for green space, but individuals can help it as well. And we are just having so many drives that are being totally hard landscaped over, not supposed to, but they are. The water runs off. We get terrible flooding where we are. They take up the trees. And there should be something where through education, we can, and through the local plan, we can encourage people not to concrete or hard landscape all their front drives. They can put a fruit tree in their back gardens, not put plastic lawns down, and do something through education. And that should become through part of, I think, through part of the local plan, because we're seeing it where we are in Acton. We've hardly got any green space at all, and we're getting terrible flooding because of it, because there's no trees, because there's no lawns anymore, because there's concrete drives. And I think we have to look at that. And it's an education thing, and I don't see why that can't be written into the local plan, but we can work on it as a bottom-up education, because that's how things work. It's not top-down. You have to speak to people. You have to get out there and explain it. And as for golf courses, they are environmentally extremely unfriendly. They use lots of chemicals to keep them green, whatever, and they use a huge amount of water. And I think one council-owned golf course per borough is absolutely adequate, and Leamington Spa's done a really good job of rewilding one of their golf courses, and they're building around the edge of it, and it's really great, and lots of people use it for walking on. So that, but my real thing is the concern of overdevelopment where there's no amenity space, no green space, and the heat is going to develop there. And for the planning officer to say, well, it doesn't matter, they can use the park across the road, when there's about another, don't know how many dwellings going to be using that park as well. We have to look at that, and we have to look how we plan our developments, not surrounded by concrete, not hard landscaping all the way around. And I think that has to be part of the local plan.
Okay, thanks, Libby. I guess this is pointing to you, Ian. Do you, or either you or Ilias want to have a go at answering that? How do we deal with this hard landscaping and come up with something less hard, really? Yeah.
I mean, I think there are some good points made there, and I do understand where you're coming from. I mean, I think the issue with hard standing of front gardens it's a kind of perennial issue, and it is. Unfortunately, it's quite difficult. There's the scope of what the local plan can do. Unfortunately, is quite limited because essentially it is permitted development in many circumstances, subject to certain requirements and criteria, and it isn't, unfortunately, the place of the local plan to define what is developmental and what is permitted development. So I think that is recognised. I think certainly the urban greening factor tool is I feel will be a significant tool for us going forward in terms of securing securing the right type of green space and green infrastructure. And I think that the particular value with the urban greening factor and also biodiversity net gain as well is that the emphasis is not in the past. I think the emphasis has been around and I think being honest, our policies, the policy approach in the past has been we've got to secure a particular area of provision. We'd specify provision standards in terms of this amount of square meters of open space needs to be provided, but I don't think that necessarily results in the best outcome, because it doesn't look at quality as well. And I think that is the advantage of things like the urban greening factor and the biodiversity net gain, and I think those will be key tools that we will have to hand to ensure that we are securing both the right quantum and the right quality of open space going forward.
I think you could have something like it's just to discourage something like it's concrete, whatever hard landscaping drives should be discouraged. And in fact, you spent some money with somebody called Christine Eberl, who did a really good plan in Greenford on how you can gravel over your drive and you can still go to drive and park your car there. And yet that seems to have done nothing. So you can encourage people and show them the way. And just one line should be discouraged, and we have ways of showing you how to do it or something like that. It's really becoming a big problem, and it is not helping the well, ecology whatsoever. So I just think just a one line or something like that, and how we can encourage people, and maybe a little bit of money to do some bottom up teaching, training, whatever.
Okay,
thanks. Sorry, yeah, I was going to, we can obviously note that, but I think it's sorry, Chair. It's whether it has any teeth, I think, is the key thing as well, isn't it? Because I mean, it's we can have kind of aspirational statements like that, but does it actually affect any real change in people's kind of behaviours?
There is planning enforcement that is not enforcing it at the moment. Where?
Okay, well, I think we can, yeah, note that. I mean, as you say, I mean, it may be worth having those aspirational statements in the planning document anyway, you know, even though they don't carry much force. It's perhaps worth just sort of stating them, but that's something for the planning officers to think about, I think.
Yeah, but planning enforcement aren't enforcing it at the moment.
Okay, thanks. Does anyone else, does either Ilias or Russell have anything that they want to say just on that point? Or
no, thank you. I think Ian covered me.
Okay. Shall we move on to Councillor Manro then? Go ahead, Councillor Manro.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Can I say it's been an interesting meeting, and thank you, Russell. That's very. I have seen your work before, so it is interesting. It's.
Thank you.
I suppose the thing I did pick up some other interesting research, and I just wanted to throw that in the mix because it's interesting how you can pick up some of this stuff. There's a whole paper being devoted to the looking at the birth rate in this country, and over this local plan will be looking at what Ealing would look like in 20 years' time. And according to this paper, on looking at the birth rate and the drop in the birth rate in this country, it would have they reckon it would have a major impact on such things as play space, the need for sports grounds, and including the need for family homes, which are larger, because the birth rate is falling at such a fast rate. In 20 years' time, or in 10 to 15 years' time, we may find that we just don't have the need for the larger family homes, the children's playgrounds that we would have, or even the sports facilities. And that is what I think maybe some of the officers need to look at. If the birth rate is really going to plummet and go down, and the number of children are no longer going to be there, do we need all these, will we need the facilities in 20 years' time? And I'm wondering whether Ian's looked at that in terms of birth rate.
Oh, okay. Well, Ian, have you looked at that? Yeah.
We have indeed, and absolutely demographics is a key factor, particularly looking at kind of future population trends, birth rates, and so on. That is a key factor in all of the various strands of work streams around green infrastructure. For example, we're looking at, in relation to the sports facility strategy, it's obviously key that we understand demographics to understand, future participation rates in relation to different sports. So we look at different age profiles going forward, and so on. So, and in fact, the thing that we are retesting, which in relation to sports facility strategy, is that we'd originally plugged in some earlier population projections from the GLA, and they've now republished some more up-to-date ones in September this year. So we're just in the process of providing those to the consultants so that they can factor those into their analysis in looking at what the future need and demand is likely to be.
Okay, thanks, Ian. Russell, did you have anything on that point that you wanted to add?
I'm not sure. I'm qualified to do so, I'm afraid.
I think Councillor Manro was almost arguing that because there'll be so few children and there'll be so many more elderly people. I mean, perhaps they play golf. Lots of older people do play.
Well. Interestingly, the scheme that I showed you, the last slide, if you can remember back that far, was for a retirement scheme, and you know, and this is a very big market. I mean, we're doing a lot of work in this sector. We've just got planning for a carbon net zero retirement village on the Greenbelt, so it's absolutely something that we are responding to right now. Not the reducing birth rate so much as an aging population.
The aging population. Oh, okay. Well, that's interesting. I know retirement villages are a huge thing in the United States, I believe, and it's sort of beginning to become a trend over here as well. Okay. Well, I think we'd better bring the meeting to a close now, as we have overrun just a bit. But Councillor Mahmood would like to say something. So over to you, Tariq.
Oh, thank you so much, Chair. But I found this very interesting meeting. I'm sorry I was a bit late here. I don't have any question, and it's very interesting observation and the thought we gathered tonight. But if we will follow the Russell point of view, so we need to convert all the golf courses in residential units. Which is I like his enthusiasm. We can work together. Well, what I wanted to reiterate, echo what my colleague Councillor Martin said earlier. As far as I know, London Borough of Ealing's golf courses, almost, correct me if I'm wrong, almost every golf course have got either right of way or public path. And anyone, there is no barrier between the golf course and the general public. That's my observation. So when you said the golf course was shut during pandemic, I don't think so. People still can go walk through the golf course. I know we have got 4 or 5 golf club in Ealing, 7 golf club, and they are all accessible to the public. And yes, and I reiterate what the Councillor Mandro said. Yes, I have read the London Borough of Ealing birth rate is very much down, and that's why I'm a school governor of a couple of his schools. That's why we are struggling to fill the places in nursery as well. So these are the facts we need to work on that. Thank you, Chair. That's all I can do. That.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Councillor Mahmood. Okay. Well, I'd like to thank all of the speakers at the meeting this evening, Ian and Ilias from planning, and Steve Barton, who's also sort of contributed, and of course I'd like to thank Russell Curtis for coming along and giving us that very interesting talk about.
Thank you for having me, Chair.
That has provoked some discussion. So thanks very much. The next meeting is in January the 20th, when I think we're talking about employment. So I hope we'll have an interesting meeting then, and I'll see some of you then. So I think all that remains to be said now is you know, have a Merry Christmas, everyone. In the meantime, try and avoid either catching or spreading COVID, and I'll see most of you, I hope, in the
Chair.
New Year.
Sorry, Chair. Libby Kemp indicated for a question. I know you're closing, but she has indicated.
I think that was still up.
I think is that your? I'd assume that was your previous question, Libby. Is that correct? It is. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
I have another one, but you know.
Okay, yeah, I think the meeting had better draw to a close now. So okay, unless anyone has anything desperately urgent they need to say at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay. Merry Christmas and
Merry Christmas to you all.
Merry Christmas, Chair.